The wind whispered through the towering gates as Leela Gray stepped out of the taxi, her small suitcase heavy in her trembling hand. The mansion before her rose like a fortress, windows glimmering with golden light, yet the silence around it felt almost alive. Her heart pounded, not from the beauty of the place, but from the weight of the envelope tucked in her coat pocket, the contract that had rewritten her future. She had signed her name because she had no choice, because love for her grandmother had forced her into a world she didn't belong to. Every step toward the massive front door felt like stepping into another life, one she had never dared to dream of. The stones beneath her shoes echoed loudly, as if mocking her fear. She told herself to breathe, to stand tall, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Leela had always been quiet, a girl hidden in the corners of life, unnoticed, unimportant. Yet tonight, she was walking into the home of Adrian Cross, a man whose very name was spoken like a legend. Powerful, untouchable, a figure people respected and feared. She wondered why he had chosen her, out of all the world. When the butler opened the door, warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of polished wood and something she could not name. Her voice caught in her throat as she followed the sound of her own footsteps into a grand hall, lined with portraits that seemed to watch her. The study door was ajar, and inside, a tall man stood by the window, his back to her. His presence filled the room, even in silence. When he turned, his eyes met hers, sharp, unreadable, and yet carrying something she had not expected: curiosity. "You came," he said simply, his voice steady, as if he had always known she would. Leela swallowed hard, her world spinning with questions she dared not ask. She realized then that her life had shifted forever, and there was no turning back. Something waited here, something more than fear, more than survival. She just didn't know yet if it would save her or break her. The following morning, Leela woke to sunlight streaming through tall curtains, the kind of sunlight that made the marble floors glow like water. For a moment she forgot where she was, until her eyes traced the gilded ceiling and the vast room around her. This wasn't the small wooden house she grew up in, where every creak of the floorboards was familiar. Here, silence stretched like a stranger's hand, elegant but distant. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, unsure if she was meant to feel grateful or trapped. As she wandered through the endless corridors, she noticed the details: the sweep of velvet drapes, the chandeliers glittering overhead, the paintings of people who seemed to stare down at her as though judging whether she belonged. She felt out of place, like a guest in a story written long before her arrival. Yet beneath the grandeur, she sensed something missing. Despite all its beauty, the mansion carried a loneliness that clung to the air. When Adrian appeared in the dining hall, he didn't speak at once. He watched her quietly, as though measuring the distance between their worlds. She waited for coldness, but instead he pulled out a chair for her with unexpected courtesy. The simple gesture left her unsettled. Why would a man so powerful treat her with such careful respect? Their meal passed mostly in silence, yet she caught the way his gaze softened when she spoke of her grandmother. That evening, while walking through the garden, she paused at a fountain, its water shimmering beneath the moonlight. Behind her, Adrian's voice broke the stillness. "You see emptiness here, don't you?" She turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. Her lips parted, searching for an answer. In that moment, she realized she was beginning to see him not as a legend carved of stone, but as a man carrying shadows of his own. And it left her wondering what secrets lived behind those walls of wealth, and why she had been invited into them. Days slipped by like quiet echoes, each one pulling Leela deeper into a world that felt both dazzling and suffocating. She learned the rhythm of the house, the way the staff moved with practiced silence, the sound of doors closing softly in distant corridors. The endless ticking of clocks that reminded her time was no longer her own. Yet with every hour spent near Adrian, the man behind the contract became less of a mystery carved from stone and more of a puzzle she could not stop trying to solve. One evening, she found herself in the library, its shelves rising higher than she could see, books stacked like treasures of forgotten lives. Adrian entered without a word, his presence filling the space as easily as the firelight did. He picked up a worn volume, his fingers brushing the pages as though they held a memory. "My father read this to me," he murmured, not looking at her. It was the first glimpse of his past he had ever offered, and the softness in his tone startled her. For a man known for power, this fragile thread of memory felt more valuable than gold. Leela listened, hesitant but drawn in, until he finally met her eyes. There was a depth there, pain, pride, and something unspoken, as though he carried a weight no fortune could lift. For the first time, she sensed the loneliness hidden beneath his sharp control, and it mirrored the ache inside her own chest. She wanted to speak, to tell him he didn't have to stand alone in his shadows. But the words caught in her throat, fragile and uncertain. Before she could gather courage, Adrian closed the book and placed it back on the shelf, his expression composed once more. Yet the silence that followed was not the heavy distance of before. It was something new, something alive, and it lingered between them like a question neither dared to answer. Leela left the library that night with her heart unsettled, knowing she had glimpsed the man no one else was allowed to see. Days grew heavier, as if the mansion itself sensed the tension building between the walls. Leela had begun to understand Adrian not just as the powerful man whose name echoed through the city, but as someone shaped by loss, choices, and sacrifices too deep to voice. Yet the closer she felt, the more the outside world seemed to press in. Whispers of judgment and suspicion reached her ears, questions she could not answer, opinions she could not sway. The weight of her decision, the life she had chosen for her grandmother's sake, threatened to crush her courage. One evening, while walking through the Grand Gallery, she paused before a painting of a storm-tossed sea, its waves colliding in chaotic beauty. She thought of her own life, of the storm she had stepped into when she signed that contract, and the fear that she might be swept away before finding solid ground. Adrian appeared silently at her side, his presence both grounding and unsettling. "They don't understand," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the tempest in the canvas. "They never will." Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him it was okay, that she would stand by him, but the words faltered under the weight of the world's expectations. For the first time, she felt the enormity of what she had entered, the clash of innocence and power, of simplicity and influence, and the invisible battles no one else would see. Yet in that moment, something shifted. Adrian's hand, brushing hers ever so lightly, offered a silent promise: "You are not alone in this." The night grew colder, shadows stretching across the marble floors like fingers. Leela knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more questions from those who would judge her too harshly. Yet a spark had ignited inside her. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. And as she looked into Adrian's unreadable eyes, she understood that the true storm they would face together had only just begun. The days that followed tested Leela in ways she had never imagined. Every glance from the staff, every whispered comment from the city beyond the gates, reminded her of how different her world had become. She had stepped into a life of wealth and influence. Yet the greatest challenge was not the grandeur or the luxury. It was finding the strength to stand firm in the face of doubt and expectation. Adrian, ever composed, observed her quietly, never forcing her to conform, yet offering guidance when she faltered. Slowly, she realized that true power was not in gold or titles, but in courage and conviction. One afternoon, a crisis erupted that threatened to shake the foundation of everything Adrian had built. A betrayal from someone he had trusted nearly toppled his business empire, and suddenly, the walls around them felt tighter, the mansion colder. Leela felt fear clawing at her chest, but as she watched Adrian navigate the storm with calm precision, something within her shifted. She could either shrink back into her old self or rise to the challenge. Standing beside him not as a shadow, but as a partner, she chose to act. Her voice, once quiet and hesitant, found strength as she offered insight, perspective, and unwavering support. Adrian's eyes, usually guarded, softened as he realized she was no longer the timid girl who had arrived at his doorstep. Together, they faced the adversity, their combined courage turning the tide. In that moment, Leela understood that true resilience was born not from avoiding fear, but from meeting it head-on, with determination and heart. As night fell, the mansion no longer felt empty. The echoing halls carried a new energy, one of partnership, trust, and the unspoken promise that no storm, however fierce, could break them. Lila's journey from uncertainty to courage was far from over. But she had taken the most important step. She had discovered her own power, and in doing so, she had changed Adrian's world forever. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. When Lila stood at the window of her room, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, the timid, uncertain girl who had arrived months ago was no longer the same. Each challenge, each moment of doubt, had shaped her into someone stronger, someone unafraid to step into the unknown. Yet even as she marveled at her own growth, a quiet anticipation filled her chest. Tonight was different. Tonight, the invisible walls between her and Adrian, built from fear, pride, and unspoken pain, were finally beginning to crumble. Adrian entered silently, his presence filling the room like a shadow with warmth. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the weight of the moment to settle around them. For the first time, Lila saw not the powerful, untouchable man known to the world, but someone human, someone who had carried his own fears and loneliness silently for years. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, an unspoken understanding passed between them, trust, respect, and something far deeper, connection. They spoke softly, their words weaving a bridge between their hearts. It wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about recognition, acceptance, and the courage to be seen fully. Lila realized that the night was not just a passage of time, but a turning point, a moment where fear transformed into strength, hesitation into confidence, and isolation into companionship. Every doubt she had carried melted away. Replaced by clarity, she had stepped into this world not to be claimed, but to grow, to inspire, and to stand equal beside someone who had once seemed untouchable. As the hours passed, the mansion no longer felt like a cage, but a home, alive with the quiet triumph of courage and resilience. Lila understood that her journey had not been about wealth or power, but about finding her voice, embracing her worth, and discovering that true change begins from within. That night, under the soft glow of moonlight, two worlds collided, not to overpower, but to uplift. And in that collision, everything truly changed.